We've evaded the nerf hammer once again, pun intended. With this build, we're one-shotting rare mobs, decimating bosses, and efficiently clearing packs of enemies. In this version of the build, we've got improvements to itemization, we've changed up the passive tree to get more benefit, we added a unique item called the Vertex, which allows us to get our Giant's Blood. So now, not only are we using a two-handed weapon, but we're also using a shield, which means we've doubled our survivability. And we made some Ascendancy changes, which I'll talk about in a bit. Now let me break down how the build works for you. But first, if you like my content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm live right now at twitch.tv/screamheart. So how does this build work? Hammer of the Gods is a long cooldown, very powerful ability, and we're able to spam it anytime we want. The reason for this is because our Ascendancy has not only built-in cooldown reduction, but a 33% chance to not use cooldowns. So we'll use our hammer, and if we get a 33% chance, then we get to use the hammer again. And this can happen multiple times. If our hammer ends up going on cooldown, then we use Time Snap, which is an ability that resets our cooldowns. That'll bring us back to here, where our hammer has another chance to be cast, and another chance to not consume the cooldown. And this can happen multiple times. Keep in mind that there was also a chance for the Time Snap to not be used as well. This puts you in a scenario where the absolute worst outcome is to have 2 casts of your hammer, but in a best case scenario, you can do a dozen or more. And keep in mind, because we have built-in cooldown reduction, and we're able to hit some on the tree, our hammer is already going to have a naturally lower cooldown. Combining this with Leap Slam and Bone Shatter as a quick and efficient way to clear packs of weaker enemies, this ends up being a really well-rounded kit. Now, my character setup is going to be custom tailored to me, so if you're looking for what you should grab, I highly recommend clicking on the link under the stream and going to my Mobalytics. Here I've detailed the uniques I recommend, I've put the priority stats on each item, and I've listed all the recommended gems in the order of their importance, except for Ancestral Warrior Totem, which I'm currently not using. So first off, let me talk about these Ascendancies. Initially, my plan was to go for Footprints in the Sand and Ultimate Command. Footprints in the Sand ended up being very useful as a way to get my health and mana back, and then I not only stripped mana out of the build, but I also realized that I was dying to this sometimes, because I would press it and go to a place that I didn't need to be. Now of course that's user error, so if you're a skilled player, go for it. But I think for the vast majority of players, we're going to be better off with passives that actively work for our benefit. But the other reason is that Time Freeze is a little bit underwhelming. It also contradicts our hammer. So for example, if we were to go for these nodes over here to increase the duration of our Time Freeze, that would cause our Time Freeze to last longer, but also make our hammers take longer to drop. Alternatively, if we went for reduced skill effect duration, our hammers would drop faster and our Time Freeze would be shorter. I also think that the recoup plays into our survivability with our shield nicely, and Apex of the Moment slows enemies down, which helps accomplish what we wanted from Time Freeze, which is a way to make it easier to land our hammers on enemies. Also, one of the scariest moments in PoE 2 is when enemies bum rush you and you don't have time to react. This will slow them down enough to give you that time you need. For our tree, we ended up skipping a lot of this middle stuff here, and instead we took a path that gives us more jewels and access to more meaningful nodes. This node here, for example, gives 1% damage for each 1% chance to block. With this setup, you can get 75% chance to block, so you're getting 75% damage straight up, and this one doesn't require enemies to be stunned or have their armor broken or anything like that. So this is very good. It's also contributing to your survivability. And don't be too afraid of this node here that gives 25% reduced global defenses, because this is reduced, this isn't less. That means that this node here is reducing the same amount as we can increase from just these 2 small nodes here. Now I do recommend, if you don't have the Vertex, to stick to the original path, which will take you down right here, give you Smash, and connect to the rest of the tree here. This is a more efficient path for people that aren't using a shield yet, and you'll need to get the Vertex helmet before you're able to use Giant's Blood. Continuing down from here, we've got some nice damage for melee range right here. We're taking blood magic so that we can spend life instead of mana. You'll definitely notice your Hammer of the God chunks coming out of your health whenever you cast with this, but we have a lot of built-in survivability that helps keep our health up. We've got Split the Earth and Skull Crusher. This is giving us the extra chance for an aftershock with our hammer and other slam skills. And this is one of the only more damage multipliers on the tree. We've also got some life recoup for physical damage that we've prevented, and considering we're preventing 75% of damage with our blocks, this should mean that we actually get more from this than we do from taking damage. And this is just a little tip. If you end up getting a jewel that increases the small nodes in the area, and you get one with an increased size, you'll be able to hit almost all of these nodes, And if you're able to do that, I think that it's actually worth it to come in here and grab these additional nodes here. This will end up being over 100% damage for enemies with broken armor. But of course, you'll have to pick and choose where you pull your points from. These nodes here are the closest thing to points that we don't actually need, but you'll need to make this decision based off of how well you maintain your rage stacks. For example, if you have slower attack speed, you're gonna have a harder time keeping up your rage stacks, so this could be needed. You also get 4% more damage from the maximum rage, so it's pretty good. Again, the AoE for aftershocks here is very nice, but not required. I don't have it yet in my build, and I tend to have enough AoE. If you're short on strength, you'll need these nodes. If not, you can go this direction and get yourself some extra armor. These nodes here are really nice because every single maximum rage is going to give you additional damage. And that's multiplicative damage, not increased. Bulwark is another flex point. I think it's nice to have, but if I had to pull one point out somewhere, this is probably where I'd pull it from. Hefty Unit is going to prevent enemies from interrupting your attacks, and we stack a lot of strength, so I think it's pretty useful. Perfect Opportunity is going to synergize with our unique belt, because the belt gives us more maximum damage and less minimum damage. So when enemies are stunned, this is going to ensure that we tend to go to the higher part of that range. We've got our cooldown node with Area of Effect. And keep in mind, if you have a lot of evasion, it's actually worth it to come down here and grab Iron Reflexes. And I've even gone as far as to come down here and grab Polymathy, because I didn't have enough attributes on my gear. Thrill of the Battle is going to be very good for getting in and out of groups of enemies. Natural Immunity will give us some ailment threshold, but if you're not feeling like you need this, you could always go through the middle here and save yourself a couple points. We have increased cooldown recovery here, and this is reducing enemies' cooldown recovery. This node is going to be nice to give us more movement speed and attack speed. This acts almost as an opposite to Thrill of the Battle, so when we're in the middle of a pack, this is working well for us, and right after killing the pack, this is working well for us. Over here, we're getting more chance to block, but this is also going to increase our movement speed. This whole area is basically improving the speed of the build. I will mention that Glancing Blows could be a way to get your block chance if you don't have a good shield, or if you're earlier in the game and you want to grab this quickly, you might be able to max out your block before spending as many points. Moving up from here, we're getting another node that increases our damage with our block chance. And if you are running Giant's Blood and a shield, but you haven't leveled enough to be able to get here naturally, don't be afraid to come through either over here or over here in order to get it earlier. And finally, we have a little more cooldown reduction and AoE here. For our skills, the most important ones are going to be Hammer of the Gods and Bone Shatter. Time Snap is also useful as well. All of your Jeweler's Orbs should be used on Hammer of the Gods and Bone Shatter first. For Hammer of the Gods, we're going with Inevitable Critical. This is going to guarantee a crit within only a couple of seconds. Super Critical is going to increase our critical damage by 100%, which means instead of 2 times damage, we're doing 3 times damage. Brutality is increasing our damage by 35%. Fist of War is going to increase our damage by 20%, but also increase our AoE size by 20%. This one is optional, and you could go for more damage at the cost of the AoE. This will depend on your playstyle, because I sometimes like to use the hammer to kill a group of mobs, so having this here is kind of nice. But if you're trying to one-shot bosses, I'd recommend swapping this out. If you really want to mess up a boss, you can go Concentrated Effect, which I normally keep in my Mace Strike. It's going to reduce your AoE, but you're going to do a ton of damage. And then finally, we've got Heavy Swing, which is 35% more damage, but you're going to lose 10% attack speed on your Hammer of the Gods. It's not too bad, but it definitely slows it down. Alternatively, if you have good rage generation, which you can get from jewels or your passive tree and some other places, then you could go with a gem that uses 10 rage to do the same amount of damage. Now for our Bone Shatter, it's a Leap Slam Bone Shatter combo. The Leap Slam is setting up your Prime for stun, which is the little white orb on enemies' heads. And then your Bone Shatter is going to be used to stun the enemies and do a bunch of damage. So for Leap Slam, the most important thing is Martial Tempo, because you just want this to be quick. Holy Descent is nice because it increases your survivability. Unbreakable can prevent you from getting stunned. And then I wanted to increase the damage without actually causing more stun buildup, so I put Lacerate here. And in fact, I ended up putting Deep Cuts because sometimes Leap Slam over stuns. If you don't get the Prime for stun and you instead are knocking enemies down, that can be a problem. So this will reduce that initial impact. However, if you're ever in a situation where you're not priming them and you're not knocking them down, then it's possible that you need more damage. In which points you wouldn't want Deep Cuts, and you may even need a damage gem or Overpower, which increases the amount of stun you're doing. For a Bone Shatter, we're going with Impact Shockwave, which is going to create an Aftershock, Devastate, which will fully break enemies' armor when we stun, Magnified Effect to increase the area, Heft, which will give us more maximum physical damage, and remember, we have a passive tree node that gives us a better chance of getting the high end of our damage when we stun, and Rupture, which will aggravate bleeding on enemies. And since we're using it right after a Leap Slam every time, and Leap Slam is applying bleed, this should work well. But to be honest, I've never seen an enemy not die after Bone Shattering, excluding bosses and some rares. Now, if you're pre-level 52, you're not going to have Hammer of the Gods, and you'll instead be using your Mace Strike. In that case, any good damage gems from your Hammer of the Gods, such as Brutality or Heavy Swing, can go onto your Mace Strike. But for my Mace Strike, I use Concentrated Effect. This just gives it a lot more damage, but keep in mind that it can sometimes not register your hits unless you're right up on the enemy. That fact synergizes with Close Combat, which gives us more damage for this if we're close to enemies. Overpower, which gives us a bunch more stun buildup. Splinter, which breaks enemy armor. And Armor Explosion, which does damage if we break enemy armor. Now keep in mind that you won't be using Mace Strike hardly at all. I only use this for single straggler enemies that are left after a pack of mobs dies. And even then, sometimes I'll just Leap Slam and kill them with Bone Shatter. Or just Bone Shatter, it's actually pretty strong on its own. For a Time Snap, we're going with Ingenuity and Second Wind. There is an alternate setup where you can run Second Wind on your hammer. And the nice thing about that is that you can get 2 casts off before you summon a boss or an Essence enemy, which you can technically do with this setup as well. But it's guaranteed if you have it on Hammer of the Gods, and not this way. But overall, I prefer having the Second Wind on the Time Snap. The rest of these gems aren't really needed, but they're kind of useful. We've got Arcane Tempo to cast this 25% faster, Wind Wave, which will knock enemies back if I get stunned while using my Time Snap, and Inspiration, which reduces the cost. Berserk is going to be important for giving us Life Leech and scaling our damage with our Rage. This makes stacking our maximum Rage even more beneficial than it already is. We're also going to get life back when we kill enemies, regenerate life over time, and get more healing from our life flasks. We're also using Time of Need, which heals us and removes curses and elemental ailments. We've got Fast Forward on it in order to get this more often. We've also got Herald of Ash, which is going to add more damage, and we've got Increased Duration here. Ancestral Warrior Totem is kind of optional, and I'm not using it in my build currently. And just a PSA, I was using Volcanic Fissure in it, and that was apparently what was crashing my game for the last week. So definitely don't use Volcanic Fissure if you're going to use this. But what I threw in here as the recommended is Armor Breaker, with Ancestral Urgency to place it down faster, Demolisher to break more armor, daze enemies when breaking armor, and I put Break Endurance here just in case I decide to use Endurance charges later. For our items, make sure you focus on physical damage and ranks to melee skills on your weapon. The Vertex is a requirement in order to get the full build online. And I say requirement loosely because technically there's other ways to do it, but this is going to be the most efficient way. When I'm able to spend some time and come up with a stronger way to do it, I'll put that out as a variation. For our shield, the main thing is we want block chance, and then this can be a defensive stat stick. For our amulet, the main thing is you want to make sure you get +3 to all melee skills, but realistically, you're probably only going to get +2 because these are expensive. For our body armor, I recommend going all out on the armor and plug holes in your defensive stats. For our gloves, +2 to melee skills, and attack speed and critical damage are very nice, or you could just get some defensive stats. For our boots, you want to make sure you get movement speed. For your belt, you can use a rare with defensive stats to fill your resists, or if you can afford it, a Rizlotha's Coil is going to increase your damage a lot. For your rings, I tend to use mine mostly for defensive stats, but you can get a big chunk of physical damage on these as well. For my charms, I've mostly had issues with being frozen, bleeding, or being slowed, but feel free to adjust these to your own needs. And just a note, the base types here are not important. Mobalytics has a ton of them listed. I just chose a generic one of each. You should use whatever base type is closest to your level, and preferably strength based. But realistically, you can use anything you have the attributes for. So that's it for this build for now. I do plan on making one more final version of the build, and I'll keep it up to date going forwards. Almost my entire first week consisted of crashing back to back to back, so I didn't make a lot of progress. So I'm going to be live on my stream at twitch.tv/screamheart if you want to catch the grind or ask me any additional questions. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Later.